Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and it's a privilege to be your host. Tonight, I'm joined by Creation Geologist Sal Giardina as we take a closer look at the evidence commonly used to support naturalism, evolution, and deep time. It's a mix. We're giving you guys a good variety here tonight in the start of an ongoing series that I'm really looking forward to. Questions such as, do the geological data truly require millions of years, or are those conclusions driven by underlying assumptions? What about the evidence for evolution and for the no God position? We are going to be covering those questions and more as Sal walks us through the evidence and provides answers to some of the most common objections raised against the creation model. Sal, my brother, it is a pleasure to have you back here on the Standing for Truth platform. Certainly not your first time here on Standing for Truth. And so, as always, I appreciate the time that you offer us for these programs. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Praise God. And my wife and I are enjoying living in our hideaway up here in the Appalachian Mountains. And it's a privilege to be able to address your audience and impart to them the wonder of the Word of God that He has preserved for us in this earth.
Amen. Praise the Lord. I do want to encourage people who might be new to this channel, new to what we're doing here, to check not only the live chat, Doki Doki, I appreciate it, brother, but the description box of this video where I have a link to your website, New Creation Ministries, godordirt.com, as well as all of your past programs that you've done with us here. We've been comprehensive. Your presentations, Sal, are always very thorough and informative, and I enjoy our Q&A sessions. And so again, to the audience, please do check the description box. And I do want to give you, Sal, a formal introduction for anybody who might be unfamiliar with who you are. And so I will get your first slide up so people can see a visual, brother, of who you are and what you do. And okay, Sal Giardina brings a truly multi-discipline background in engineering, geology, education, and aviation. He holds a BS in mechanical engineering and an MS in geology, and previously served as a registered professional geologist in the state of Arizona. He is the founder and president of New Creation Ministries and the author of numerous works, including In the Beginning, God or Dirt, along with multiple professional publications in engineering geology and technical reports for industry and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Agency. He also developed the interactive switched On Schoolhouse online science curriculum for grades 4 through 12. In addition, Sal is a former U.S. Air Force and Air National Guard pilot, served as an instructor and evaluator on the Boeing 757 and 737, and even advanced to NASA's astronaut candidate interview stage. Very cool, as always. Selected from over 8,500 applicants. With decades of experience across science, aviation, and education, Sal brings a unique and powerful perspective to the creation evolution debate. And having hosted you easily over a dozen times, I can say, Sal, that you're a wealth of information. And so, brother, I'm going to hand it to you and allow you to set the foundation for tonight's program. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Donny. Tonight, we're going to be dealing, as you can see on the first slide, I've modified the title of this program tonight a little bit. We'll be dealing with creation derangement syndrome, okay? We will be providing our audience with incontrovertible answers to the critics. In fact, the answers to these questions, which you will select tonight, will confound the critics, because as God has said in His Word in Romans 1:20, all creation is a witness to the attributes and the divinity of God, and that the world was created by God and by what we see out there. And the true facts of science that we have brought out on these programs many times correspond wonderfully to the Word of God. And you can depend on God's Word to take you through every situation. The main problem that the world of darkness out there, people are walking in darkness. There is a cause and effect that has produced this, is the fact that it comes down, forget the political rhetoric, forget, talking heads telling you why the world is in turmoil that it is today. It comes down to the fact that, did God really say? When you begin to doubt what God has revealed to us in his word about himself and the condition that we have in the earth and what he has done about it for you through Jesus Christ, when you doubt that that in the beginning God created the heavens and earth, if you don't believe the first 5 or 6 words of the Bible, folks, you are really in trouble, because you just simply will be walking in darkness. The good news, however, is that the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will not overtake it. In the scriptures, the actual Greek text says the darkness will not overtake, it cannot overcome, defeat, or extinguish the light. God has given us the light of this world. And so, in these last days, he's raised up numerous creation organizations to show that a lot of the things that you're being taught today, which are attempt to discredit the word of God and scripture, simply are not true. So tonight we're going to expose the deception of the evolutionary agenda. What is the overall evolutionary agenda, folks? I could summarize it for you in just a few words. Basically, if you believe that man and life itself, all life forms, were created without plan, purpose, or design, basically from nothing, as some physicists try to tell you these days. And if you fall for that deception, that scam, don't click on that phishing trip on your computer, because that agenda simply is trying to, if you fall for that, you may think that who needs God? That without God, I mean, there is no plan or purpose in their life, in this life. And the evolutionary agenda basically is trying to tell you that there is no God. Life has formed by natural processes without plan or purpose or design. And basically that if you believe in evolution, then you don't need God in this world. And you really would be walking in darkness if you fall for that fishing trip. Now, tonight, folks, I'm going to put this slide up for you again in a moment for you to look at. These are suggested topics and questions for this SFT program for audience participation. I would like you to participate in this, and let's just kick around the suggested answers to confound the skeptics tonight. You will be able to select from this list which areas that you would like to have answers for. What is it that interests you the most, so that you could also confound the skeptics with this information? And you pick in the chat by number, and Donnie will take a look at which areas that people tonight would most likely want to hear from, and I will be discussing that. I'll show you this slide again in a moment, so you have time to read it and select it. This program will help you refute the pervasive darkness which has overwhelmed multitudes. However, God assures us that we have sufficient evidence that is light to see through the deception. Romans 1:20 tells you that all creation attests to the attributes of God, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will never overtake it. It will never overcome or extinguish it. And that's what we're doing tonight. We're turning on a light bulb as God has raised up many creation ministries in these last days to refute the idea of evolutionary ideas of darkness. And he has raised up numerous creation ministries. Standing for Truth is one of them. And I thank God for Donny that and all the programs that he has put out to show people the light to overcome the darkness. Here is a link to my playlist, which you could go to if you're watching this program at a future date. You could click on this link and it will take you to many of the programs which will cover these areas, but in more detail than we can get to tonight. So I'm going to put this slide for a few minutes so that you could decide which areas you would like me to discuss for you tonight. So you have the ammunition and the wherewithal to refute the skeptics, to confound the skeptics. And I'll give you a few minutes to look over this and put in the chat which ones you would particularly like me to cover for the evening.
Sal, my brother, I love the interactive. We got people voting already. I'll give them some time here, but I love the interactive nature of this presentation, but also subsequent programs in this series. And every single one of those are such great topics. And for those in the audience that are thinking, oh no, there's no way they're going to be able to get through all of these in one program, and yet they all sound so good and they're all such important topics, we are going to make sure we cover all of them in an ongoing series. And so no worries about that. And as Sal said, it's important that we equip the body of Christ with answers to what the critics are saying, what their challenges and objections are. Sal, I'm going to have a look at the chat here and see. So, okay, we've got, look at this, just as I expected, because these were my picks as well. So we've got 8, we've got 9, we've got 9. We've got a lot, and then we've already got questions on the flood. So it sounds like people want to, maybe it's because you're a geologist. Maybe that was a selling point, Sal, perhaps. But so I'm seeing a lot of 8s, 9s. I personally wanted to see if 8 gets into, so for example, we've had a lot of critics recently over our Facebook page, which we're close to 100,000 followers there. And so we get a lot of comments a day from the critics, and they will try to object to the evidence for worldwide flood. Sal, you've presented on lack of erosion, for example, lack of expected environments if there's millions of years between the rock strata. And so we've gotten some challenges that would probably be worth addressing. It looks like the winner for now is 8, Sal.
8. Okay, we'll start off with 8, and I'm sure we'll be able to get to several others tonight. So the audience particularly seems to be interested in discussing why there are millions of non-existent years stuffed into the geologic column. Okay, let's do that. Basically, what you're not told is that, that the geologic column does not really represent millions of years of Earth history. You are told that the rock strata around the Earth forms a uniform sequence from top to bottom, basically covering the Earth. And the fossil record, along with the various rock units that we could identify, were laid down slowly over hundreds of millions of years. But what you're not told is that a lot of that time, so-called time, is hidden in what is called an unconformity. An unconformity is a proposed gap in the time between geologic units, a proposed elapsed time interval between the contact of distinct geologic strata. In other words, there are certain areas that we could examine the rock units as we go up, particularly for the fossil record in it. And people who are evolutionary oriented, particularly geologists and people who study fossils, they believe that these layers have accumulated slowly over millions of years. And then they go to another area of the country, it could be 10 miles, 20 miles, 100 miles away, and examine similar units. These 3 units are similar. These 2 units are similar, but they notice, whoa, hey, there's a number of units here missing, you see, in the strata over in this area. And but because they believe that these rocks can be dated by the fossils of which they contain, in other words, we call them biostratigraphic units. They're dated by the fossils, by the evolutionary concept that life has evolved over time and it has left us a fossiliferous record. So when they get to this area and they find that these fossils are missing, then they will say, well, in this area, X number of years are missing. Let's say this represents 10 million years of evolutionary development. And they say, well, in this area, this is an unconformity, and we've lost 10 million years of Earth's history. That is what is known as an unconformity. So there are different types of unconformities. There are a paraconformity is a hypothetical surface between conformable layers. That means layers that are laid down one on top of each other. A hypothetical surface between conformable layers believed to have been separated by a long period of non-deposition and non-erosion. So like in here, they might call this a paraconformity, not because there's any evidence that there has been a long period of time passed between this unit and that unit, but because they are missing the fossils that they believe should exist between those units. And there are many of these unconformities listed for you in the geologic literature. Here's one here between the Coconino sandstone and the Hermit Shale. You may have seen pictures of this before. You'll see it's a very sharp contact. They call it a knife edge contact, with no evidence that a long lapse of time has occurred. But they're only believed that there's like about 10 million years of Earth history missing, because they don't recognize that. They recognize that there's no fossils there that they believe should be there according to evolutionary timescale. So they have about 10 million years of cessation of physical processes supposedly has occurred between these 2 layers, with no evidence to support that. So a true disconformity is a layer on either side of a large time gap, okay, which clearly shows horizontal, which are nearly horizontal and exhibit field evidence of significant topographic relief or erosion. Okay. Now, if you see a series of layers and then you see significant erosional relief in here, chemical weathering, soil formation, weathering of the minerals, that would be a true disconformity. But in many cases, we don't have that kind of evidence. We're going to take a look at a unconformity between the red wall limestone and the mauve limestone in the Grand Canyon. It is claimed that the place between the space between these two required over it's about 200 million years of cessation of physical processes has occurred based on what they feel should be the evolutionary progression of fossils in the limestone here, the red wall limestone and the mall. It's a gigantic place where basically geologists can hide, 200 million years of Earth history. Now, when you walking down in the Grand Canyon and you cross this layer here, this unconformity, you'll see a sign in the Grand Canyon as you're walking down the trail and you cross these two layers. You'll see a sign that says rocks of Ordovician and Silurian periods are missing in the Grand Canyon, and the Tempe Butte limestone or Devonian age occurs in scattered pockets. This is true. There are some small scattered pockets of intermediate layered rocks, but they're very small compared to the basically flat planar surface between the two rock units right here. The red wall limestone rests on these Devonian rocks or on mauve limestone of much earlier age. So if it can be shown that there is no really loss of time, no hiatus, that is, between the red wall limestone and the underlying mauve limestone, then this conclusion would discredit geologic time as promoted by some geologists and do great damage to macroevolution model of origin. So we're going to show you that we're going to discredit the idea that there is a passage of time that has gone between these two layers of around 200 million years. So what we'll do, as you notice, as you come down this unit right here, and you go from the trail, you're walking down the trail. Here's several people here, if you could see this, walking down the trail on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and they're crossing over from the red wall limestone into the lighter colored mauve limestone. And that sign that I just showed you is, as you cross over the trail, is over there. Okay. And here's the sign on a diagram, which has been mapped out by George Howe, a geologist, and Emmett Williams. And as they walked down this trail, they mapped out for you what you're going to see. So let's start walking down, and you see these large blocks. They represent the red wall limestone, and so as you're coming down the trail, you go into these smaller blocks. These smaller blocks of designation are the mauve limestone, so it is claimed that you're crossing a boundary of 200 million years. The only problem with that is that as you're walking down here, all of a sudden you're back into the red wall limestone. See these larger blocks? So you've actually gone back in time. You've crossed the boundary supposedly, but then as you continue on down, you're back into the red wall limestone. Now, how could that be? How could you? The red wall limestone is 200 million years earlier than the mauve limestone. So you need a time machine to go from the mauve limestone back into the red wall limestone. Then you need a time machine again to go back into the mauve limestone and then back into the red wall. So what you have here is an intertunging or intercalated series of layers that are you're not just going from one to the other and then you're over with. You're going back and forth in time, 200 million years, continuously back and forth as you go through the contact, which is basically not possible in the real world. Now, if you had a time machine like you see in Back to the Future, nobody believes in the DeLorean time machine. Remember that automobile that they had that they converted to a time machine. Now, if you believe that you could do that with a time machine, fine. But if you don't believe there's a such thing as being able to go back and forth in time, then you could see that this is the idea that there's a period that we've lost 200 million years between these layers is not realistic at all. In fact, as you go down, again, here it shows you a side canyon. You're going from the red wall limestone, this here, and then you proceed down. So in time, this was first deposited, right? These rocks were deposited from the bottom to the top, right? So these sediments are Cambrian, and then a passage of 200 million years, you go into the red wall was deposited on top of the mauve. But the problem is that you're going from here back into, you see these red layers, you're going back into the red wall limestone, then you're going into the Cambrian, back into the red wall, back down into the Cambrian, then back into the red wall. And when we see this in the field, this is a textbook geology case of continuous deposition. There's no way that you could be going back and forth in time 200 million years between each layer, going back and forth, back and forth. You just can't do that. When you see this type of intertunging type of units, it's a textbook case in geology of continuous deposition from one unit to the other without a loss of time. So this time machine is an illusion, right? So why do you believe the illusion of evolution billions of years, in this case, at this contact, that we've lost 200 million years, but it's a place to conveniently shove millions of years of Earth history into the geologic column. You get it? In other words, there are many of these unconformities in the geologic column, and it's just a great way for them to try to impress upon you that that the column represents millions of years of Earth history, because there are many of these unconformities in which supposedly millions of years of time have gone by, but there's basically no physical evidence to support that. Here is a great unconformity. At the bottom of the Grand Canyon, we have the Tapete Sandstone lying over the basement, igneous and metamorphic rocks, or what we call the basement rocks. These are igneous and metamorphic rocks as opposed to the sedimentary layer on top. And you are told here that there is over 1 billion years of Earth history has passed between these layers, but the evidence doesn't show that, because we do not see a billion years of physical deterioration of this surface, in which there would be canyons cut into it, crevices, there would be material filled in. In fact, what we do see is that there are boulders here that are incorporated from the lower rocks, boulders, into the sedimentary rocks above it. In other words, this contact, which can be followed in many places all over the world, this is a worldwide event in which there was an enormous energy of flowing water, and it ripped up this basement rock and accumulated large boulders into the overlying sediment in places. And this is a physical global evidence of a global flood on a global basis, and not just a simple passage of time. We could find the same unconformity around all over the United States. This is an area I visited as a younger geologist in New York. It's called the Potsdam Sandstone. It is the same contact that can be traced. You could see here. If this surface has been lying around for over 1 billion years, it would not be basically a flat surface. It would have much physical evidence of deterioration between the two units. Here is the same contact in Payson, Arizona. I was over here looking to have a geology field trip, and I was examining these rocks to see if we could have a group come over and show them the contact between the basement Precambrian rocks and the overlying Tapete Sandstone. It is claimed to be 1 billion year gap at this area here, but yet we do not see physical evidence for 1 billion years of passage of time of Earth history in any way. As it turned out, I couldn't have a field trip over here because it was a little bit too dangerous, too close to the road, and for people to get to this contact at this location. This here is a picture of where that contact is. This road comes out from a town called Payson, Arizona, and where I was standing is right above this road by the cliff face here. And there was traffic going by, and that's where that contact is. But yeah, this topography, though, all these sediments here, you're told, has accumulated over a period of about 15 million years. In other words, the erosion from the top of this plateau down to this road, it is claimed by geologists that erosion has taken place over 15 million years. But when you get right over here at this flat contact, they tell you 1 billion years has gone by. But it's the contact is very flat without any evidence. But over here, you got over 1,000 feet of relief, and you're told that is represented by 15 million years. The two simply don't logically fit together. Now, what you're looking at here is a logical fallacy, a gross error in reasoning, and I'm going to show you this. This would never hold up in a court. You're looking at the Grand Canyon here, and these layers, as you've been shown from other presentations, I'm sure, they're all flat lying, one on top of the other. They were deposited rapidly, but you are told that there are two layers here, between here and there, and this layer and that layer. If you went had a close-up look, you were told that there's one of them is an unconformity of 10 million years and one 20 million years. Okay, so you're told that there's a period of lapsed time of 20 million years between these layers, which you can follow along, are perfectly, almost perfectly flat. And here is 10 million years. So here you have 30 million years of Earth history hidden in the geologic column without any particular evidence. But here's the logical fallacy. If you were on the top here, and almost any geologist will tell you that it has taken this canyon to erode down, right, from here to here, several thousand feet of erosion to get to the Colorado River down here. And they would tell you that the Colorado River has been eroding this canyon for about 4 or 5 million years, maybe 6 million, depending on who you're talking to, okay? So get this. This, you are told in all the textbooks that this Grand Canyon has been eroded from the top down to the Colorado River. This is over 1,000 feet of topographic relief over a period of 4 to 6 million years. 1,000 feet of topographic relief. But here there is no relief. But this took 30 million years, okay? This is a logical fallacy that you are looking at right there. In this case, the illusion of an enormous time span is not what they would call in a court of law. If you were to show this diagram or take a jury to this area and show them, or just show them the picture in a court, trying to claim that this represents 30 million years of lost geologic time, they would tell you in the court that it is non sequitur. The conclusion is not supported by the facts or the data. It doesn't follow. In Latin, this means it does not follow. Your conclusion does not follow. It would be thrown out. So the premise of deep time between the flat layers does not follow from reality of the enormous deep erosion of the entire canyon down to the Colorado River, if you were presenting this to a court. That is to say, I know that you don't get out of bed, right? Thinking about unconformity. So I'm sort of repeating myself to kind of get the idea through your mind of what you're being duped at, okay? That is, it does not follow that these flat contacts are separated by deep time spans when you are in fact staring at the huge topographic relief, which clearly results from only purported several million years of erosion. Okay? So logic. Can a time interval really be missing? Well, If you believe a time interval could be missing, then that's totally illogical, sir. Where would it go? I mean, even Dr. Spock, who is not one prone to emotions, just by pure logic, you can't have a time interval missing. But if you were to say that no, the time interval isn't missing, but nothing happened for millions of years between these layers, this would be completely improbable also from what we know of geology and earth physical processes at the earth. There is no place on the earth where there could be no physical processes going on of erosion and deterioration for millions of years. So then logically, millions of years of natural processes are expected, okay? In other words, if you go out on a highway or you lay down a cement foundation at your house, a sidewalk, it's not going to last 1,000,000 years, 100. You're lucky it even lasts 50 years or 100 years, right? Everything begins to deteriorate at the Earth's surface, and the amount of wear and tear. You could examine the surface and see roads need to be repaved, sidewalks need to be redone, etc. Everything on the surface of the earth is susceptible to deteriorate. And so if you can't find the evidence between these layers, if there is no evidence, then deep time is simply an illusion. These unconformities are essentially hiding so-called millions of years of Earth history. But the defendant claims, that is, the evolutionary defendants claim, that the proof lies in the assumed biostratigraphic age of the enclosing fossils. Remember the first slides I was showing you? They see that there's some, what they believe are missing fossils, and according to their evolutionary time frame, therefore there should be a period of non-erosion and non-deposition. Okay, so their proof lies in the assumed biostratigraphic age, we could say evolutionary age, of the enclosing fossils. But this is merely begging the question. This is another logical fallacy. If you present this in court, is begging the question, another logical fallacy, trying to prove something through which you already assume to be true. Thus, we are only left with another deception, okay? So when you present this evidence for evidence, that which you assume to be true, and that which you're trying to prove, that's called begging the question, and it would be thrown out of court as non sequitur almost immediately. So this is just a quick response to that question. But to just reiterate, in the geologic column, there are numerous unconformities that are, you are told, each requiring millions of years of Earth history with no particular evidence to support that. And so there are actually hundreds of millions, actually billions of years of Earth history, so-called hidden in the geologic column, for which there was little or no evidence. So, Donny, this brings us back to our slide here, in case there are other areas you'd like to discuss.
Yes, I'm looking at questions and objections and questions of clarification that came in. And maybe I'll get one or two in there for you to engage before we move to the next topic. But I will say, I'm going to put your slide back up quick. It looks like 9 is going to be the next pick. And therefore, since that topic is why a worldwide mixture of marine and terrestrial fossils, that is going to, I'm assuming, brother, get into the so-called ordering of the fossil record. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I'll save questions on that for you to probably answer in many ways in in that topic. But I do want to give, so far that's in the lead, but let's just see. So to the audience, I'm going to put this up again as I ask Sal a question. You have some time to pick. So far it looks like it's 9, but we'll give them a couple minutes to relook those over. Okay, so Sal, many good points, brother. We find these flat or gently undulating layers stacked across enormous regions. And this has been confirmed in many ways. Your presentation there on unconformities and lack of the evidence for the millions of years of deep time evolutionary history in the geologic rock strata. Okay, we get geologists, deep time proponents. These are some of their favorite arguments that I've seen, and I'd be curious to see how you engage. So we will point out, Sal, that there's a lack of erosion. We're not saying that there's just absolutely no erosion in the geologic rock strata, but there's a lack of erosion that you'd expect if deep time were true. But they will simply follow up by saying, no, you Creationists are wrong. And I've received this many times, especially over Facebook. We find erosion everywhere on the earth, consistent with deep time expectations. What would be a good way for us as Creationists to equip the body of Christ? How can we engage that kind of claim?
Well, of course, we find erosion all over the surface of the earth. Look at the Grand Canyon. We have thousands of feet of topographic relief that is erosion right there. Okay. But the thing is that when you look at the surfaces between the layers, which are considered to be a passage of millions of years, that is, they're called an unconformity because the two surfaces are unconformable, meaning they don't conform to evolutionary progression based on the fossil record. Again, this is begging the question. They're trying to prove evolutionary time, but they're trying to prove it by saying, well, we're missing the evidence of evolution. Yeah, but you're trying to prove that evolutionary time is past, okay? So what do you mean? Of course we see erosion in all different places on the earth. But when you try to tell me between two particular surfaces that lie directly on top of each other, there is no particular evidence of erosion between those surfaces. In other words, we don't see a deep canyons and river valleys and crevasses. We don't see the soil horizons between those that form. We don't see the deterioration of the minerals, the chemical deterioration between the two that you would expect if they were lying there for millions of years. So, of course, we see areas of erosion around the earth, but we're talking about, is there evidence between these two flat-lying layers? Show me where the evidence of erosion is, if in fact millions of years have passed between those deposition of those two layers. And then, of course, I took you to a classic example, zeroing in, where you go from one layer back and forth to the other. You cannot go back and forth in time as you walk across those layers. Those layers have to be laid down simultaneously or contemporaneously. In other words, you had one layer laying down the mauve, then the water's coming in, bringing in some of the red wall limestone, then retreating, then water's coming in and laying down the mauve limestone, etc., back and forth. This is a swishing back and forth of the waters of the earth, like the Bible contends during the flood. The Bible actually says the waters went back and forth. And we've shown that from previous programs. So we have direct evidence in the canyon that there is no gap of millions of years between those, but a continuous layering back and forth of the two units. And but again, I'm repeating myself. We do find places where we have erosion, an enormous amount of erosion, but we're talking about what do we see between two consecutive layers that is one lying on each other, in which you
Right.
claim millions of years have passed, simply based on your idea that the fossil record is missing in that area based on evolutionary thinking.
So when you mention these stacked layers with fine boundaries and no evidence for deep time or past environments between them, we often hear, pancake stacked layers. And so my wife makes really good, healthy protein pancakes. And let's say you got 7 or 8 and they're all stacked on each other, right? And there's just small little gaps in between each one, these fine layers basically between each one. Is that kind of what we see in a lot of the geologic rock strata that suggests the rapid laying down of these sediments during the flood? It's just one after another after another. Whereas if deep time were true, Sal, are you saying no, we should find large gaps in between each, showing past environments, past history, deep time evolution, but we're not seeing that, Sal?
Right. When your wife makes the pancakes, say she has a stack of 4 pancakes, and let's say she hands you the first pancake, but she tells you now the second pancake I'm going to put on top of it, that's going to be 4 years from now. Just wait for it. Well,
I couldn't wait that long.
Well, the first pancake isn't going to look too good after 4 years, is it?
Right.
You're going
Yes.
to see, if you saw 2 pancakes that were laid on top of one on top of the other over a period of 4 years, and you examine it, I don't think you're going to want to eat it, because you're going to see evidence that 4 years has passed.
That's
right?
a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We see no evidence that 10 million years has passed between particular layers that they point out. See, there should be physical evidence between those layers, and it just simply isn't there.
Well, that's a really good analogy. That's a really good additional point on top of that analogy about the stacked pancakes, because each pancake looks fresh. My wife or anyone who's having pancakes, you have pancake on top of pancake on top of pancake. You're ready to eat those fresh pancakes. But if one pancake were sitting there for even a week or even several hours, and then you put a fresh pancake on top of it, you're going to be able to tell just by examining it that, hey, this isn't very fresh. This has gone through a little bit of history, which the rock strata doesn't show.
Yeah. There's no place on the earth where you could say that physical processes have stopped for millions of years, waiting for the next layer to come on top of it. There is no place on earth like that. The whole surface of the earth is active everywhere you go. It's either getting deposits, sediments are being deposited, or sediments are being eroded, one or the other, but there's no such thing as an area of the earth where there is no physical activity going on.
So in light of how you answer that, plus in how because we've discussed this in past programs, would it then be accurate for us to say, as creationists, that flood geologists like yourself, Sal, you've never claimed that erosion just does not exist? Of course it does, as you've said. The issue is whether the degree of erosion we actually observe matches what should be expected if tens or even hundreds of millions of years is separating these rock layers. That's what we don't find.
Exactly. Between the rock layers, you are looking at over 1,000 feet of relief in the Grand Canyon, right? You with your eyes from the top to the Colorado River to the bottom of the Colorado River is an example of a massive erosion. Okay. But that is claimed to have taken about 4 to 6 million years, but that produced thousands of feet of topographic relief, right? Now you're showing a layer, one layer on top of another, like a pancake, but you're told that's 10 million years that's passed. It's non sequitur. It would not hold up in a court.
No, not
if you
at all.
presented that as evidence, the judge would, the defendant would object to it, and the judge would say that your objection is confirmed. That you would throw that out.
Right. It'd be thrown out of a court of a freshman law student could get that thrown out
Right.
of court. A commenter here, Jackson Rowe. Good to have you, Jackson. He is a critic and skeptic of the global flood. So he's got a clarifying question here based on what we're discussing. He says, so it's eroding or depositing. Isn't he answering himself here? So are we contradicting ourselves, Sal?
No, on any place on the surface of the earth that is exposed, any surface is either in a process of erosion or in a process of having materials deposited on top of it, one or the other. There is no such thing as an area where there's nothing happening. There's no physical processes happening at that location, particularly, we're talking about millions of years or hundreds of thousands of millions of years. You know what I mean? There is no place on the earth that you could put your foot that you could say there is a cessation of physical processing. That's not even logical. Makes no sense.
Right. So when critics, and I'm looking at my notes here based on what I've seen critics say, one example is this. They'll say, we find river channels, which suggest a lot of time has passed. And so I feel like there's maybe a few different ways to approach that. So you as a geologist, if a critic were to say, or someone in the field were to say, well, here's evidence for deep time in the Grand Canyon, for example, we have river channels. What's a good response?
Yeah, sure. I showed a slide like that. I don't know if I should go back to it, but depicting a little channeling. Now, between those two units, the red wall limestone and the mauve limestone, there are some small channels of Devonian rock that are in those channels. That's an intermediate rock age, okay? But you understand that those channels are very small. I mean, you're talking about, I think they're on the order of maybe 10, 15 feet. Say they were even a few of them were 20 feet. I don't recall how deep they were. They're isolated in a few places, but the contact goes for hundreds and hundreds of miles. That contact goes for across a good part of the whole country. If you were to stretch that out, say for 500 or 1,000 miles, and put a little blip 20 foot deep in there, okay, that's basically a flat surface. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, that is not any evidence of enormous period of time of deep erosion. Okay.
Right.
Yes, there are some channels here and there, but these contact surfaces go for hundreds and hundreds of miles that you could follow, like the Tapete Sandstone. You could follow it across the country and even overseas. And so to put a little channel in there, if you were to have a drawing to scale of a 2,000 miles of the contact, and then put a 20-foot little dip in it, or 10 feet on a piece of paper, you wouldn't even see it. You know what I mean? It would look like a scratch.
Yeah, that's a really good response, actually, because, and I'm glad you provided this answer, because we've had geologists and other scientists who hold to the deep time position show pictures of what they say are these channels and riverbeds and things like that. And so, as you've described with the flood, is this accurate, Sal? As you've described in several of your presentations, I mean, we're seeing a multi-phase, multi-dimensional flood during the flood year, where waters are moving across continents in multiple phases. We got rising waters, massive sediment transport, large tsunami scale flows, some creation geologists have said, shifting currents, recession and erosion. So my point with that is those types of conditions can, during the flood year, produce things like these channels or even reef-like accumulations. Another objection is within a relatively short time. But if deep time were true, you're saying no, these river channels, these we should see something more evident of hundreds of thousands to millions of years.
Instead of a few shallow channels, you would see canyons. Canyons, right? The Grand Canyon has an erosional relief of over 1,000 feet. Okay, it's 1,000 feet. We're not talking about 5 or 10 foot of a channel. Okay, they say that the river took about 4 to 6 million years to erode down over 1,000 feet. Okay, it's actually more than that. It's close to 4,000 or 5,000 feet. The depth of the Grand Canyon from the top to the river is around 5,000 feet. So you're talking about 5,000 feet of erosion. It is claimed that it's taken 6 million years. We don't believe that, but that's their claim. But yet on the other surfaces, there's no, they're flat as a board, and those took 20 million years or 50 million years. You follow me? It's non sequitur. It doesn't follow.
So in other words, it's the scale that we're looking at. The question is whether the processes that we see operating can account, like if deep time evolution were true, these slow uniformitarian processes can actually account for continent scale sedimentary layers, massive fossil group. What we're discussing here, I think most importantly, the flat stack strata across vast regions. Now, which I don't think deep time processes can account for those, but these little features, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said basically what we see would be like a scratch on a map, not deep canyons, not evidence of large deep time and environmental change, but just a little scratch, which can be formed during the flood.
It's not just the physical scale. That's only one lack of evidence. If millions of years had gone by, you would get chemical erosion of the upper or the lower surface. In other words, if the surface has been sitting there for millions of years, so-called, you would have chemical erosion of the surface. The minerals and the rocks would be deteriorated and chemically altered. We don't find any major alteration like that. Between these layers, there would be what's called bioturbation. There are various animals and stuff that bioturbate the soil and go throughout the soil and produce worm borings and tunnels and channels and stuff like that. If the surface was left for a long period of time, we would also find soil layers. Soil takes quite a long time for rock to deteriorate into soil horizons. We don't find any significant soil horizons going for 1,000 miles in each direction, or even locally sometimes. So it's not just the scale of the erosion, but these other physical evidences that we would expect. So when I had to replace 20 feet of the railings on my front deck, they're made out of wood, hardwood, and they've been sitting there for, I don't know, maybe 20 years, okay? I just had to replace them because they were so deteriorated. Follow me? We have chemical deterioration just sitting out in the sun. I just recently had to replace them all, okay? So the sunlight and the chemical deterioration, we would expect if a surface is sitting there for millions of years waiting for the next layer to form on top of it, you would expect the deterioration. This is just common sense, you know? And so I had to replace my railings. That's just 20 years.
Imagine a couple million years.
Yeah, imagine a million years. You know, if my fence was sitting there for 1 million years, there wouldn't be any fence. There would be dust.
Right. Yeah, I could tell, like going back to that illustration or analogy earlier on the stack of pancakes, I could tell if my pancakes have been sitting there for 5 minutes, 5 hours, 500 years, 5 million years. You could tell by examining them. And so
Yeah,
that's a really good point that you make about
yeah,
the lack of evidence for those
yeah.
layers.
Would you eat? Would you, if you peel off the first few pancakes that are on top, and you get down to the, near the bottom layer, and it was sitting there, that bottom layer pancake was sitting there for 3 years. I mean, you ain't gonna eat it.
No, I'm not going to eat it. I'll be able to tell. No, and if I do, I'll be getting very sick.
You would be able to tell.
You'll be able to tell that syrup has dried on there and the pancake is withering away. But we don't see this in the rock strata. Okay. Before we move on to the next topic, because it looks like I think it is going to be 8 or 9. I'll put the slide back up. It was 9. So, but I want to get this in here first. I'm going to save the other questions. To those in the audience, don't worry. It's just your questions that I have saved pertain more to that topic. So, paleosols. Firstly, is that describing so-called ancient soils? We have critics that say the existence of these so-called ancient soils or paleosols prove long periods of time. Is that true? Are they misinterpreting what these are? What's a good way for us to engage that?
Well, there are some areas where people believe that the deterioration of the rocks represent the paleo soil. That could be debatable. I mean, usually, if a soil is formed, you know whether it's soil or just deteriorated rock. There are areas where the surface of a rock can just get chemically altered. And I worked on a project where they built a skyscraper and put the foundation pillars on the altered rock. And they thought they were on solid rock, and it was just, it wasn't a soil. It's just what's called, I forgot the name for it. It's chemically deteriorated rock. But we could tell that from a soil, okay? And the building was got in trouble as they raised this skyscraper. It started having real bad problems with the foundation. I won't mention the area and the building and stuff, but that because the pillars were on saprovite, it's called saprovite, which is a deteriorated rock, which is not a soil in itself. So in some cases where people have seen these saprovite layers, they think that it is a soil layer, an ancient soil layer, but it's just chemically altered rock.
That's a great response. We had at the end of last year a seminar with Tim Clary, and another geologist, and I'm curious as to your thoughts. He made the point, well, some of the supposed paleo soils lack key characteristics that we would observe in modern soils, and a couple of those traits would be clear root systems, well-developed soil horizons, right, evidence of long-term biological activity. So in other words, are some deep time proponents, what they're saying are ancient soils actually aren't. These are, so I guess during the flood, sediments are laid down and then they're altered through other processes during that time that make them look like they're potentially ancient soils, but they're really not, Sal?
Yes, that's correct. And just like they said that they claim that there are glacial tills deep down in the rock record, because we've had glaciation about 3 or 4 times in the so-called evolutionary geologic past. But those rock layers that they see down there are really not glacial tills. They're just ground up, deteriorated rock, avalanches and such. So they're not what they're claiming them to be. And an actual soil has very specific characteristics. You mentioned a few. You're going to have organic material in there. It is just not just a chemically decomposed rock, which we call engineering geologists like myself call saprolite, and it has been weathered and deteriorated. But again, if you follow these contacts where they say there is a passage of millions of years of Earth history between these contacts, if you follow them along, you very, very rarely find that kind of chemical deterioration, whether it's a soil or not.
Mm.
In other words, the contact looks fresh.
I love it. This is great. Because I mean, these are what I've seen as being the best arguments, because they're typically coming from scientists in the field, and these are great answers. Sal, this is why I always say it's a blessing having you on, because you're a wealth of information, you're trained, you have the experience, and those answers were very helpful to me and also the audience. So, okay, how about we move to the next topic that has won the vote? So far, 8, most people wanted to hear 8, which you just did. And then 9, and then third place so far is 5, of course. You know, the greatest fiction story ever told. So why don't we evolution's hope, dream, and imagine that they're related to banana plants.
Yeah.
Brother.
Okay,
So
we'll look at
9.
number 9. Why is there a worldwide mixture of marine and terrestrial fossils? Let's take a look at that. Let me just say outright that you are not told normally in school or in the university or elementary school, any level of school and education, even geologists, they're not told that basically there is a mixture of marine and terrestrial fossils in many areas of the geologic column. And this is hard to explain. How do you explain that? They're not marine sediments totally, and they're not terrestrial sediments totally. But the Bible has an explanation for that. It says this in Genesis 8:3, and the waters receded from the earth, talking about during the worldwide Genesis flood. And the waters receded from the earth, going forth and returning. And at the end of 150 days, the waters began to decrease. So for 150 days, the waters began to accumulate on the earth, growing deeper and deeper. Do we see that in the geologic record? Do we see an advance and a retreat of the waters? Yes, we do. And you had here Dr. Clary on your program not too long ago. He has done an extensive study of the basic units that we find in the sedimentary rocks. They're called mega sequences. And we can see these below the surface through deep drillings. In some places, we could see it in the outcrops, like in the deep canyons, like the Grand Canyon and other deep canyons, where we could cut through these sequences and examine them. But in many places around the earth, we have these deep well drillings, and those could be examined. And we have found that there are basically 7 major sequences that have been mapped by Dr. Clary all over the earth now. For years, he's been working on this, and he has mapped it in the United States, South America, and Africa. But he has now extended his research to other continents of the world. And what we see is, starting at the bottom, right on top of the basement rocks, so the igneous and metamorphic basement rocks, as we see the sedimentary rocks accumulating, we usually see very coarse granular rocks fining upwards, but we see the amount over the continents increasing and then decreasing. And the decrease is due to the runoff. The waters during when they advance are increasing the thickness of the rocks, but when they run off, then they erode back and reduce the thickness of the rocks. And so we have an increase and a decreasing, a back and forth throughout these major units. Without going into all the detail, you could refer to his book, Carved in Stone. It's an incredible work. Creation geologists are often accused of not doing any original work, but in many cases, we do more original field work than the evolutionists. But anyway, as we go up through the rock column, we could see the advance and retreat of the waters. This is generally the level of the waters today along this line. And then we saw a major advance, retreat of the waters, and then a smaller advance, and then a major retreat of the waters, which correspond to the erosion at the surface. Now, secular geologists have attempted to make a diagram like this from their work, but it is nowhere near as detailed as Dr. Clary. I forgot how many thousands of well borings he has examined. That material is available to be examined, and all over the earth. And as I said, the secular geologists had a similar one to this, but it's more confusing because they're not working with nearly as much data as he has. So this is a data-driven diagram worldwide of accumulating of major depositions units around the earth. And it is data driven because this is not arm waving. This is done by measurements all over the earth. I will say that I have pioneered some of this work myself as a graduate student in Syracuse University. I was among some of the first geologists to use this. It's called regression analysis, in which case we could map the subsurface units and plot them and put them on a computer and have the computer draw out the maps of these various units below the surface of the earth. And I did that for an area around Syracuse University many years ago. I was among some of the first people to advocate this and have written a professional paper on it, on how accurate this type of analysis could be. When I use about 650 test borings, that is drillings in the area of Syracuse, whereas he has used thousands and thousands. Dr. Clary has used his data from thousands of deeper borings from oil wells. So now, what do we find as we go up through the sedimentary rocks, starting at the Cambrian rocks in the geologic column? Supposedly, we see in blue here, these are marine. These are mostly marine fossils, and this is what we would expect as the waters were accumulating on the earth and rising. They would continue to move onto higher and higher ground. So the first fossils we find are mostly marine fossils, but then as we start to get to higher ground, we start to pick up terrestrial fossils. We start to pick up amphibians, and then other terrestrial fossils like not dinosaurs right away. We start to get into larger animals, larger mammals, and we start to pick up more and more land animals. So there are many sediments in the world, many areas where you could go where we find both marine fossils and terrestrial animals buried together. Now, how do we explain that from an evolutionary standpoint? How come we have a mixture of marine and terrestrial animals? Okay. Found it in the rocks and in increasing numbers as we go up. Okay. How do you explain that? That's pretty hard to explain from if you don't consider the rising waters of a global flood, because this is a global phenomena that we find. We would expect this with rising waters all over the earth. The vast majority of fossil graveyard environments are representative of a mixture of ecosystems, especially when you get into the geologic column in the top half of the geologic column. At Dinosaur National Park, for instance, it's just a conglomeration of huge dinosaur bones that are all broken up, busted up, and laid out due to, no doubt, high energy currents. And this is not just one dinosaur, laying over and dying and slowly being covered. This is a mess of disarticulated bones by the thousands and thousands. But what you're not told is that with these are many clams, fossils of clams and such, marine organisms. It's a water-laid jumble of disarticulated dinosaur bones found with the dinosaur fossils as a group of bivalve clams. Why were they deposited in an unlikely place among the land animals? Okay, why is there a mixture of marine clams and and dinosaurs? Very hard to explain from an evolutionary standpoint. There's hundreds of thousands of marine creatures were buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects, and reptiles in a fossil graveyard. Okay. So you have in France, there's a large area where they find thousands and thousands of marine creatures right along mixed with every kind of land animal you could imagine. And again, they don't tell you about this in grade school. But if the waters were going to and from, just as the Bible said, and as they were rising, you would start to get this mixture of buried fossils. Two paleontologists from the Museum of Natural History in Paris report that the evidence tells a contradictory story. Now, tell me, what do you mean by a contradictory story? It contradicts the evolutionary scenario, okay? That these animals accumulated slowly over millions of years in their own environment, separated from each other. They say this because some of the fossils are marine creatures, some are definitely freshwater dwellers, and some are definitely land creatures. Here is a fossil of a dinosaur and a fish buried together. Dr. Clary had this in his book. How did this happen? This is an amazing fossil. I mean, take a look at this. This is clearly a dinosaur. Okay, can you see that, everybody? Now look what's buried right with the dinosaur. This fish, it kind of looks like a shark. I don't know what they identify it as. Okay, here is a marine a fish buried with a dinosaur. Okay, so how did this happen? Unless these dinosaurs were buried in a worldwide flood in which the waters began to cover the earth and intermix both the terrestrial animals and the dinosaurs and the fish together. An amazing thing, but this is not uncommon, though. I mean, this is found through many areas of the fossil record. Non-evolution throughout the geologic record. Okay, this is Dr. Carl Werner, who you've had on your program, Donny, and he and his wife went throughout the world visiting. I forgot how many museums, almost every major museum in the world. They've spent many years doing this and categorizing what they've found, cataloging what they have found. And you have here modern animals. Okay, modern animals are found in every named rock layer. This is predicted by the flood model. It's another trade secret of paleontology. You do not find this in the museums, as I've pointed out in previous programs in more detail. When you go to a museum, they show you these various animals that have occurred, and they have them labeled in millions of years of Earth history, having slowly accumulated, is what I call the biostratigraphic column that they believe in. And but with these are found modern animals of all kinds in almost every layer. When you go to a museum, you are not going to see that in the same layers that they found the dinosaurs. Okay, you see a dinosaur exhibit, never are you going to see right alongside the dinosaurs ducks, okay, chickens, various modern animals that were found in the same sediments buried with them, showing that there was no evolution over the so-called millions of years of Earth history. All these animals are found together, but not just animals, but modern plants, modern trees, a fish of every kind, modern fish, which we can identify in these layers, but they do not show you that within the layers that they dug up the dinosaurs, which are supposedly like 60 to 150 million years old, right in those same layers are various modern animals today, showing that during that so-called time period, there was no evolution. So what does the fossil record say? Wow. We find we've been intermingled with all sorts of strange fellow and rapidly buried alive all over the earth. What happened to us? That is the question. What is the explanation for this interchange, intermixture of these various marine and terrestrial animals? What is the explanation? Well, the Bible has the explanation. They tell you the flood waters rose over the earth for 150 days and then began to recede and erode certain areas and expose these sediments. So I ask you, why is there a worldwide mixture of marine and terrestrial fossils? Okay, this is something they don't tell you about very much in school.
So, Sal, what we see in the fossil record, the so-called fossil record, we do find mixed environments, as you were saying, land creatures mixed with marine creatures like sharks mixed with plants, which is what we'd expect if there was a global flood.
Exactly. We see this sediments being laid down all over the earth to a greater extent, a greater volume, let's put it, volume and an aerial extent, then a retreat. We see an erosion surface between them, then a second, third, fourth of this happening over a period of time, just like the Bible said. And we do find in the lower layers, as expected, as the waters began mostly to flood, mostly the marine creatures were being buried, began to rise and get disturbed by the fountains of the great deep, producing enormous amounts of sediment going into the ocean and burying these marine creatures. But then we start to pick up the land animals as we go up through the geologic column, as expected, and we start to find more and more of them because, of course, many of the land animals could try to go to higher ground as the waters were coming in. And this is one reason why we have what would appear to be a evolutionary progression, but it's actually just an environmental progression of animals trying to escape the flood.
What if someone were to say, so for example, we have some critics in the chat, and we always appreciate our skeptics, helps us to refine our arguments and model and hopefully plant some seeds. And so Andrew coming here asks, so they're mixed, because we're pointing out here that the fossil record, I think, can be explained through the flood, but many different factors are at play, where you have the pre-flood world is broken up into different regions. Within those regions, you have different ecological zones, and then those are buried at different points during the flood. But we also have mixed environments because we have sea life being thrown onto the continents and so on and so forth. So a lot of mixing there. But a critic might say, well, either it's ordered or not. And so this is a contradiction. And so he's saying, so they're mixed, but they're also ordered in other places, ? What is the prediction supposed to be here?
Well, there is somewhat of an ordering because we do find, as you've seen in that slide, you're going to start out with the great majority of fossils are marine fossils because they are buried first. And then as the waters progress to higher and higher ground, you would expect them to find amphibians and then reptiles, then mammals. The mammals could rapidly move faster to higher ground, etc. So there is a somewhat of an ordering in the fossil record, but that appears to be from the rising flood waters, as we've seen Dr. Clary show all over the earth. From the subsurface information, we could see that the sediments were being deposited over the continents further and further and at higher elevations and in greater thicknesses. So we expect a somewhat of an order, but then there's chaos within that order too. You know, I mean, all the little local environments, you could get a mixture of different fossils and such. So there's an overall order due to the rising waters, but at any one location, you might find some exceptions.
Yeah, and that makes sense. That also makes sense of what you're pointing out with some of Dr. Carl Werner's work, where we largely see stasis, where if evolution's true, a lot of these creatures, because we even find mammals in the same layers with dinosaurs, you don't really see that depicted in your textbooks shown to the children. Usually they just see a world of dinosaurs and nothing else, right?
Right.
But we see these
all your pictures, all your dioramas, all your museum displays do not show that there are modern animals, modern plants, modern marine animals, and different fish, modern fish that can be identified in the same sediments as the so-called ancient sediments containing the dinosaurs.
So would it be accurate then, because where you were saying we find mixed environments, but at the same time, potentially a general order to the fossils that we find in the rock strata, specifically because we understand there's the pre-flood boundary, flood rocks, and then also the post-flood boundary. I should ask this because there are some questions about the flood boundary. Was anything you were presenting there based on the fossils that we find that require rapid burial during the flood? Does any of that depend on where one puts the flood boundary? Because I know some creationists put the flood boundary at the KT boundary, which I think that's kind of low. Others, like Dr. Tim Clary and Mike Ord, put it high Cenozoic and variable. So my question is, does anything that you presented depend on a specific flood boundary, Sal?
Well, I think you see that as you go up in the geologic column, you get more and more terrestrial animals, which indicate the floodwaters were covering the land at higher and higher elevations. But at sooner or later, you get to a point where the floodwaters started to recede, and then you start to get erosion. When the waters start to recede, they start to run out into the current ocean basins and cause havoc and erosion. So, and we do see some fossils mixed in with those eroded sediments that were deposited. But it would seem that from the overall analysis on a worldwide basis, that the best explanation for the fossil record is the accumulation from rising waters on a global basis.
Right. Which would make sense
This is an amazing diagram which he has published. It's much more accurate than the previous ones because it is based on data. It is based on thousands and thousands of deep well analysis drillings. You know, when they drill these deep wells and holes, oil wells and such, they keep samples of all the material down in the hole. It's all kept in museums and stuff. I used to keep hundreds of them for the Oil and Gas Commission. All that sampling is available to examine, and he has examined thousands of these, and you could see that the extent and the volume of these sediments, these various layers that can be identified, they're called mega sequences, are increasing in volume and extent over the continents. And he shows you the actual pictures of the continents, so you could see the extent of these increasing in volume and then receding during the last stage. It's it's all done by computerizing it and drawing the maps, which I did at the area of Syracuse many years ago. I mapped the subsurface units, computerized it, and had to draw subsurface maps just like this of the various units underneath the city of Syracuse, New York.
Wow, it really is true what the Bible says in 2 Peter 3, that scoffers would come in the last day, denying the clear evidence for the worldwide flood, for the special creation, and the coming judgment by fire. They are connected for sure. And so we're saying that a lot of these layers, rock layers during the flood, have been laid down rapidly through catastrophic processes. What if a critic were to say this? So Sydney Raptor here in the chat, thank you for the question, or the argument at least, for us to engage. He says, no, the layers themselves and their composition and formation, lithification, for example, are evidence in themselves for deep time. So he's saying the composition, I guess the way that they examine these rocks is evidence that know they are a lot older than just a few thousand years. They could not have been laid down in just a single year, Sal.
Well, I would say to that, show me the evidence.
Right. It's more of an assertion.
Because what I've shown in previous programs, if we examine these layers that we could trace for thousands of miles, if we examine them, they're saying that within those layers are evidence for deep time. So I would say, show me, what is your evidence? But the evidence that I would show you is that in each layer, okay, they're basically monolithic layers. In other words, each layer is basically made up of a similar material. Like the Coconino sandstone is mostly all sandstone. The Kaibab limestone is mostly all limestone. If you follow those layers, here's the bottom line. We don't know of any process on the face of the earth. Now, we understand geologic processes from studying the earth and the various environments of deposition on the earth. That's what geologists do. Many of them do. But there's no known process on the face of the earth that can produce these monolithic layers, identifiable layers of basically the same material extending for 1,000 miles, and sometimes not just across the continent, but due to Dr. Clary's work, we could extend them and show that they're intercontinental. They go from one continent to the other. In other words, the same unit. All right. There's no process on the earth that we know of that can produce these kind of layers and units on a continental basis like that. There's no river overflows and spews out conglomerate that is a bouldery bedrock right at the bottom of a river. We know of no river on the earth that that can produce sediments for thousands of miles, thousands of square miles in every direction. I mean, a river produces boulders, yes, but along a little strip along the river. Follow me? We don't know of any physical process on Earth that can produce these layers that can be traced for thousands of miles.
It's a great answer. Looks like we got some pushback here, so I'm glad that the chat is engaging. George Case here says, sedimentary rocks are loaded with ichnofossils. Okay, we can merge several questions in one because I've seen this argument from ichnofossils come in several times tonight. So burrows, feeding tracks, which proves they are paleo seafloors and not a giant flood deposit because floods cannot deposit ichnofossils. Is that true, Sal?
Well, the fact that we have these type of ichnofossils, these are indirect evidence of creatures like footprints and worm burrows and things like that. They cannot be exposed for millions of years and last. These are very delicate fossils. If you go out on the beach and you see a whole bunch of footprints, in a few hours the tide comes in and goes out, and those footprints of people on the beach and are gone. So ripple marks, footprints, worm borings, these are temporary things which cannot exist for millions of years unless they're rapidly covered over, see, and preserved. So these type of fossils, where we do find them, are an indication of rapid sedimentation. They were preserved because they were buried and preserved rapidly. They're very delicate fossils. If they were to be exposed on the surface for a long period of time, they deteriorate, like ripple marks and such like that.
Right. And that's my thinking as well. I see the existence of trace fossils, basically is what they are, ichnofossils, as being better evidence for worldwide flood. And as I feel like people have a straw man idea of what the worldwide flood was. I mean, you're going to have different phases, different repeated pulses of sediment moving across landscapes as waters rise and recede. And that during those points, can't animals move in, briefly walk across newly deposited areas, leave their traces, and then boom, get buried. But then the traces they leave, like foot tracks, get buried rapidly. I don't. My point is, I don't see how this is a challenge to the global flood, unless you have a false idea of what the flood was like.
No, it isn't a challenge. It actually helps confirm the fact that these various fossils, delicate fossils, were covered with sediment rapidly and preserved. All those type of fossils, which are indirect type fossils, they have to be covered rapidly in order to be preserved, like footprints and such. They can't be exposed for a long time at the surface.
Gracious Crybaby says this: evidence of periods above sea level in the canyon is evident from abundant sedimentary structures such as mud rock. So I guess here's some more features apparently that we can't explain. Raindrop prints, ripple marks, cross bedding, and small animal tracks, which you just addressed. But all of these apparently are supposed to suggest deep time and are contradictory to a worldwide flood. What's a good response, Sal?
I don't see how they could suggest deep time. What they suggest is that the fact that we still find them in the rock layers in areas indicate that they were preserved by being covered by overlying sediments rapidly. They were covered and protected by overlying sediments. That's the only way you can protect footprints, right, and various trace fossils that they're called, like that. If you leave them to exposure for a long time because they were accumulating slowly, they would disappear. They get eroded.
What cross bedding? To someone who's new to this, what's cross bedding, and why is that not a problem for us?
Well, cross-bedding is an indication of subsurface strong currents moving sand and such, and depositing sand from very, very strong currents. So you get what is called cross bedding in surface. This has been shown in laboratory tests and stuff. And the cross bedding that we see, like in units, large sandstone units, indicate that they were deposited underwater by very, very rapid, strong currents, not slowly over, millions of years.
Right.
The Coconino sandstone is, you're still told in classic geologic literature and textbooks that it represents sand dunes. And that has been shown over and over again. The type of sand in those Coconino sandstone, which it extends for something like 400,000 or 500,000 square miles, is not the type of sand you find in sand dunes, and sand dunes do not produce sand that is accumulated and form some cross beds, do not lay down at the angle that we find in the geologic record. The angle of the cross beds can be measured, and the angle at which those cross beds dip down is more consistent with high velocity waters, the sand being deposited by high velocity under the water.
So under the water during the flood, moving water,
right?
Fast currents. Okay, so
very
that's a good answer.
Very fast. The sand does not have the characteristic of that you find in sand dunes.
And that's a great response that people need to listen to a couple times, because that's a major argument.
I've gone out and measured it for myself. I've measured cross beds in certain areas of the Grand Canyon just to myself to see if what creation geologists were saying is true. And I have what's called a Brunton compass. That's a side companion of all geologists. And with that type of, it's like a small transit, and you can measure the angles of the dip. And the angles of the dip of the cross beds in the Grand Canyon that I measured are not consistent with that which you find in sand dunes.
Well, that's pretty cool. So you've gone out yourself in the field and confirmed with some creation scientists or geologists. I think Dr. John Whitmore has done a study on this, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And you confirm what they're saying is accurate.
Yeah, because many geologists have measured the cross beds, and they're pretty consistent. If I remember right, I think they fall at around 15 degrees, and which is 15 to 20 degrees, which is pretty steep, and that indicates they were laid down by water, not by just wind.
Well, that's great. Yeah, because they'll say it's with wind deposits and therefore the flood can't account for that. But no, if this is laid down by water and fast moving currents and tsunamis are involved, perhaps, then we have a good explanation. Here's a question comes in, $2 super chat. Appreciate the support. Scriptures and Stones coming at this from an old earth perspective. Sal asks, how does Sal explain the mid-continent rift?
The mid-continent rift. Well, apparently, during the worldwide flood, we had plate movements, tectonic plate movements in the lithosphere of the Earth. That's the upper 20 miles or so of the Earth's surface. It's called the lithosphere. And in some places, it's been compressed, in some places torn apart. And I think the mid-continent rift was a place where during the flood, the east and west side of the United States started to be torn apart and separate, and flood basalts came up through those areas, and that's where we find a lot of flood basalts, I think, and iron deposits. So I think that the mid-continent rift is part of the movement of the plates, the tectonic plates around the Earth. In the United States, I think it started to get pulled apart, and then later on came back together.
I think that makes sense with catastrophic movement of these plates. I'm trying to find this one that came in. I thought it was an interesting follow-up. Oh, right here. The chat's moving quick, so I'll just reiterate. Andrew Cumming was saying, oh no, here it is. If he's saying these tracks, for example, are easily washed away, this goes back to those ichnofossils or trace fossils argument. How on earth would a high energy flood not destroy them all?
Well, again, the floodwaters were receding and expanding and then receding a little bit. So as apparently as the tsunamis were coming in across the continent and overall causing the water level to rise, but at times as they came in, they brought sediments in with it and covered the trace fossils. In other words, they provided a sedimentary covering over them and helped preserve them. So right. We have areas where ripple marks are preserved, bioturbation is preserved, and
raindrops,
footprints.
Yeah, I think we're I think it's pretty clear that footprints and burrows actually require rapid burial to be preserved. Otherwise, they would erode away quickly. But in a flood scenario with repeated sediment pulses, animals could leave tracks that are then buried almost immediately, exactly how ichnofossils are formed. Not a problem for us, but a problem for them. Let's see what Andrew Cummings' follow-up is. How is that any different from conventional geology explanations for these trace fossils?
Well, what they find is, as far as I know, I'm not an expert on like dinosaur footprints, but I think what they're finding more and more, where they do find areas where there's a lot of dinosaur footprints, that most of these footprints are all going in the same direction. In other words, these dinosaurs weren't just wandering around, eating grass and trees.
They're running away from the floodwaters.
they're running in a certain direction. Yeah. Right. In some cases, they could tell that they were running from the stride and such of the footprints. But many of them, they're all sort of going in the same direction. This is not like a casual grazing. And in some places in a few places, they found that as the waters rose, the footprints were getting less and less because the animals started floating. And then some places their feet could touch the ground, but as the waters rose, their feet could no longer touch the ground, and then the footprints sort of disappear. See, and there is some evidence of that it appears that the animals were just overtaken by water as they were trying to get to higher ground. The other evidence is that it's very, very rare where you find dinosaur footprints to find any juvenile dinosaur footprints. Very rare anywhere in the world. In other words, all the adults were able to run away and try to escape, leaving the juveniles behind.
Wow. Yeah, I find a lot of these challenges and objections are answered nicely with the flood, but then 2 Peter 3 says that scoffers and critics deny the flood. So now they got to look elsewhere other than the flood to explain the geologic observations on the earth. I'm curious, Sal.
Well, that's why I call this program, an alternate title was debunking the creation,
derangement.
Derangement syndrome. Because if you don't believe the first that God created the heavens and earth and life is a sophisticated creation of God, if you don't believe that, you're going to be deranged. I mean, you're not going to be able to accept even the evidence that is accumulating to support Scripture, which is voluminous amount of light and evidence, which is light. Is accumulating all over the earth. You're just going to refuse to believe it, So in Romans 1:28, it says that if you continue to refuse to acknowledge God, I will turn you over to a reprobate mind.
That's true.
I mean, you're just not going to be able to see the light.
Well, Romans 1 is so powerful because it says, in the same way that they did not want to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them up, God gave them over, God gave them up to a reprobate mind. And so they're basically, God's basically saying, okay, you don't want to retain me and your knowledge. You want to believe everything else other than God created. Well, then you're going to get what you want and you're going to be rejected, essentially, is what reprobate means. So
what you see here is amazing. It is absolutely amazing. This is a data-driven. Dr. Clary has produced the maps in 3 dimensions. This is just 2 dimensions, right? But he's produced the maps in 3 dimensions to verify what Scripture has said on a worldwide basis, using thousands and thousands of data points. This is not arm waving. This shows, just as the scripture said, that the waters accumulated over the earth and retreated, accumulated and started to retreat, etc., until they produced a greater extent. They covered more and more of the land surface and the thicknesses. He has all the volumes of sediment around the earth, the aerial extent, all the numbers are in his report. This is an amazing diagram supporting scripture.
It's incredible, Sal. It's why I like to say good science affirms good scripture. Now, brother, we did just hit the 2-hour mark, and so I want to respect your time and be cognizant of that. Should we save the next couple for part 2, or did you want to do one more session? It's totally up to you, Sal. What would work best?
Well, I think so as not to overload people tonight, just so much people that could absorb. Let them take a screenshot. I would recommend people who would like to have answers to some of these others to take a screenshot and be prepared to come back with the next session so that we could debunk those that have a creation derangement syndrome.
Some of the critics in the chat don't like that word deranged, but I told them all it means is you're irrational. And you would have to be irrational. So I don't think that's too harsh, because it is irrational to believe that time, matter, and space comes from, quote unquote, nothing. Non-living chemicals can somehow evolve into the first self-replicating molecule, and that you as a human are related to banana plants, ladybugs, and walking sticks. That is irrational. So
it is.
There's no other way to put it.
What we know from science today, right? We just launched a spaceship around the moon, an incredible feat of scientific engineering and intelligence to do this incredible feat. We've just done that, and yet many physicists today recognize that every life had to start from information outside the universe itself, outside the physical universe, that the source of information is it transcends the physical universe. They admit that now, that information comes from outside the physical universe. They just won't acknowledge what the source of that information is. And so this is unfortunate, but this is where we are. I mean, people simply don't want to accept it. Do you think that this space venture that we just had was done by chance? No, it was done by design and purpose, intelligence, design and purpose. But every person listening to this program is much more complex than the Artemis 2 spacecraft.
Right. That's amazing. It's an amazing point. One single cell is more complicated than the entire space shuttle or everything that went into that space mission and the spaceship that they use and all that.
Exactly.
And so it's incredible. And I like to say there's no better time to be a biblical creationist. So, Sal, I'm going to put that slide up one more time for people. 2 hours has flown by. You answered all the questions that I had, a lot of the objections that came in with ichnofossils and so-called river channels and paleosols or ancient soils. You did a great job, Sal. And I am very excited for part 2 already. So to those in the audience, screenshot that slide with the 10 topics. We went through 2, but the 2 that people picked were very large topics dealing with the flood. And so for part 2, we'll probably get into more of the evidence for evolution. I think that one was titled something about evolution being the biggest fiction fairy tale imagination out there. So I think that's probably going to take the lead. We'll probably kick off the next show with that one. So Brother Sal, I appreciate all the time. I appreciate the knowledge. You're incredibly helpful every time you're on the show because of how interactive these programs are with you. So I want to hand it to you. If there's anything you want to leave us with, final words, final thoughts. And again, thank you for another fantastic program, Sal, my brother.
Sure. Just a few final words. People sometimes, when I talk to them, they say, "Well, what is your proof that God exists?" And I just point to them, and say, "You are the proof." I mean, you're standing there in front of me, or right now you're listening to me, okay, and you are receiving information. And that information is non-material. Okay. It doesn't come from any material source. You cannot reach out and grab my words. Just humor me for a moment. Try to reach out and grab my words that I'm saying. You cannot. Yet these words are going forth and giving you information. Information is of the spirit. It's non-material, and therefore could not form from any natural material process. You are a product of the creation of God. The fact that you can listen to me, understand, and absorb information and design an Artemis spacecraft to go around the moon is proof that life comes from God.
Wow, incredible final words. That right there will be a good clip. Evidence for creation, evidence for God. It really is, Sal, that simple, brother. And so we've got a lot of good feedback that came in throughout the program. Cam Lee has really enjoyed this, among others. Thank you so much, Donny, for hosting. Well, it's my pleasure. I couldn't host these kinds of shows if it weren't for all the great guests that are so willing, like Sal, to offer their time for this. Doki says, thank you, Sal. And Sal, I got all the relevant links here. So I'll make sure this is updated soon as well. I'm working on a major website update, as it's been a couple months and we have a lot of material to put on the website. So there's Sal's section there. Sal's website in the beginning, God or dirt. Teaser, the answer is God, not dirt. See, God can take dirt and form man, but dirt can't create itself. Okay, atheist? Sal's website again.
Yeah, you got to get your own dirt.
Yeah, exactly. I like to say, if you don't like the universe that God made or the world that God created, go make your own. You can set your own standards and rules, but this is God's universe. And
go create your own dirt.
Right. Good luck. Good luck with that. So Sal, God bless you. This was a ton of fun. I'm already looking forward to part 2. Hopefully we can schedule it sooner than later, because I know people are going to be looking forward to that as well. So to those in the audience, thank you for tuning in. I hope you were as blessed as I was for this program. We got through 2 excellent topics. We got 8 more to go, and I'm excited for those. So thanks again for tuning in. Including the critics. Hopefully we plant some seeds and got you to think. We want these to be thought-provoking. Stand for Truth is signing off. God bless you all.